just got in every little neighborhood, these little, especially like in the South, like these pétanque courts everywhere. And they have a little public building attached to them and everybody meets there and they drink and they play pétanque like all the day and stuff. Like, look, I know that's an incredibly low key thing, but just in my more kind of, I don't know,
that's
abstract utopian moments,
yeah.
I'm like,
Hello, this is What's Left of Philosophy. I'm Will. Here with me today is Gil, Lillian, and Owen. Hey, y'all.
hello.
Hi.
Hey.
So today we're going to be discussing an article in the Boston Review by the philosopher Christine Sypnowich on equality of opportunity compared to equality of flourishing. I also had the pod read an essay I wrote in response to Sypnowich's article, but for the purposes of this introduction, I'm just going to focus on outlining the arguments that Sypnowich makes. I won't spend too much time on possible critiques because I just want to get into the conversation. So basically, Sypnowich argues against the view that, in her words, our egalitarian aspirations are realized once we ensure equality of opportunity. Now, I think for many of you all, equality of opportunity talk saturates the horizons of our political discourse. One of my favorite examples comes from both Obama and Trudeau saying something along the lines of, today's youth/blacks aren't looking for a handout, they're just looking for a fair shot. To be fair, now that I've lived in Toronto for a couple of years, I think young people are kind of looking for a handout of a house rather than the fair shot. But this is what our state of political discourse from our electeds looks like now. Instead, Sypnowich suggests that as egalitarians, we should not shy away from focusing on outcomes, rather than limiting ourselves to the procedural questions of whether we have equal opportunities. She thinks we ought to have the goal of making it such that people live equally flourishing lives. Inheriting the socialist tradition, Sypnowich argues that our primary concern is not whether abstract principles of justice have been violated, but whether our policies and principles actually achieve social and individual flourishing. I want to say real quick because it'll be easy to misunderstand Sypnowich's point. When she says our primary concern is not whether abstract principles of justice have been violated, she is not saying it's cool to violate principles of justice in the name of flourishing. She is saying that simply adhering to abstract principles of justice does not actually tell us whether this is a society we would normatively evaluate as the best we can do or what we should aim for. So we can think of the two broad paths here between equality of opportunity and equality of flourishing in this way. We may deem our society unjustly unequal because we can see that there is an unequal distribution of advantages and opportunities for people to live the lives that they're choosing. Sorry, that's technical language, but those of you who've read any Rawls or Nozick and all that, that's the type of language that they use about distribution of advantages and opportunities. But for Sypnowich's argument, if we take the viewpoint of equality of flourishing, we may deem our society unjust even after seeing that equal opportunities have been distributed because we see that not everyone is flourishing. No doubt, Sypnowich offers an argument that would be hard for both liberals and socialists to accept. And it's important to emphasize that both liberals and socialists, and there are multiple responses, and some socialists disagree with Sypnowich here. They would disagree because they would think it sets the bar too high for what egalitarianism requires of us. Most of us have some form of the liberal insight, and I don't mean the pejorative way, I just mean in the technical sense, the liberal insight that we should not impose upon individuals our conception of the good life. This is the principle of neutrality in liberalism. But by focusing on flourishing, Sypnowich thinks that we can have some overarching account of what a flourishing life looks like. Now, There's no society that thinks we can make no judgments about how individuals choose to live their lives. For instance, what governments tax and how reflects attempts to incentivize individuals in the choices they make for their lives. For example, taxes on alcohol that aim to limit consumption, or tax breaks for couples who marry with the aim to encourage certain forms of sociality and reproduction. I think it is useful to keep this in mind because it does offer, and Sypnowich takes advantage of this, a wedge from which you can say that concerns with flourishing are implicit if underdeveloped in liberal democracies. In order to be fair to liberalism, equality of opportunity has meant many things. It has meant, and I will list three, the removal of social barriers like sexism and racism from competing for scarce resources. So in the United States, this is why all businesses say we are an equal opportunity employer. Others have claimed that the removal of barriers is not enough if the weight of historical discrimination still affects how well people can compete. And still others, such as Rawls, Dworkin, and Martha Nussbaum, have zeroed in on issues of fairness, resources, and capabilities, respectively. So it is possible for equality of opportunity to have wide-ranging social and economic policy consequences, and we should not think it only means eliminating de jure or legal discrimination for liberal endorsements of equality of opportunity. Again, I think that's important because Sypnowich doesn't go for the low-hanging fruit. She wants to say that even more robust defenses of equality of opportunity, that these policies are still compatible with significant inequality. And so I think the bone of her contention is this. Focus on equality of opportunity naturalizes or even positively defends that our conversations about equality must take place within the universe of competition. And if there is competition, there will be unequal outcomes. After all, we cannot all win all the same things. The dilemma that Sypnowich tries to address is whether equality of opportunity can truly save itself from disastrous outcomes of inequality, while retaining its commitment or some commitment to a laissez-faire principle as it concerns flourishing. She thinks not, and it ends up acknowledging the commitment to a laissez-faire principle, ends up acknowledging the possibility for disaster, people losing their homes or not being able to find jobs, but leaves its redress to humanitarian concerns rather than concerns of justice. So in some of the literature, it will say, no, out of charity, we ought to help those who are less well off, but that isn't the same commitment saying that the state ought to have policies to prevent certain disasters that might happen when you're competing on the so-called free market. Sypnowich's position is that a focus on flourishing does not commit to making anyone live this or that life. Again, that's the easy critique, to kind of make it seem as if Sypnowich is a totalitarian saying you have to live this way. Nevertheless, she thinks that what a commitment to flourishing means is that the egalitarian polity will have to go far beyond the mere assurance that everyone is able to make the choices that they seem to want. They will have to focus on the outcomes of choices and assess the inequalities that may flow from those choices. She writes, "This means rejecting the neutralist paradigm in order to promote what is genuinely of value, to correct cultures of fatalism, low expectations, self-abnegation, or limited horizons," end quote. And in my essay, I actually focus on this issue of equality as it relates to expectations and horizons, but maybe we'll get into that later in the conversation. Sypnowich does not think a focus on flourishing commits one to the idea that there are only a small number of paths to flourishing, or that there are only a few forms of life that would count as flourishing, or even that flourishing will be imposed by force. Her point is that, following Marx, we should be interested in the, quote, all-round development, end quote, of the human personality, rather than limiting ourselves to the procedural point of whether people are able to make free choices. The key component here is that attention to outcomes embeds a principle of revisability when faced with inequalities in a way that she thinks equality of opportunity does not. I think the most compelling argument that Sypnowich offers is the idea that equality of flourishing centers a principle of solidarity in our lives rather than an atomizing principle of individualism. And in this way, she argues that flourishing has both material and non-material components that we as socialists should be committed to, actively endorsing, and defending. So with that, I will turn it back over to the crew. What did you all think of Sypnowich's argument and the case for equality of opportunity contra equality of flourishing?
Yeah, I'll start. I thought it was great. I think that it's funny that one of the critiques that she anticipates is that having any sort of value conception whatsoever of what a good life looks like is going to be received by liberals as totalitarian. Like, liberals just love calling anything totalitarian. It's ridiculous.
It is their most favorite thing, especially since the mid-20th century. It's just, the drug they can't stop hitting.
Yeah, it's like, I think that people should have like a better material life. And it's like, I don't know, sounds kind of totalitarian. Why don't you slow your roll there and let people live their lives? So I'm not bummed by this at all, right? Okay. Like, I think that it's obviously good to... This was the part of the article that I liked. One of the parts of the article that I liked a lot is the critique of like liberalism's like value agnosticism. Right. This sort of emphasis on this particularly thin notion of freedom as like self-determination, where like as long as you remove the barriers to people potentially being able to do what they want, we're all good. And I completely agree, totally inadequate and insufficient. But one of the examples she gives is really good is having there be available classes for taking musical lessons. Like, that's fine, but in a culture that doesn't have any sort of value for artistic expression or creative endeavors, or in a society where this isn't sort of given any kind of weight, that doesn't mean that people are going to take those classes. And so, like, if we want there to be an actual like sort of better ultimate outcome, this abstract principle of equality of opportunity just isn't good enough. That just seems obviously true to me. I don't know. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I liked that critique of the like value agnosticism of liberalism. And the way she puts it, sometimes she says, liberals want there to be a plurality of forms of life that one can choose, right? And not to have it imposed in some kind of authoritarian way. And I always find that so funny because like under actually existing liberal societies, there is most definitely like a finite set of forms of life and like value and like values that you have to adopt and live if you want to survive. Like a form of life that pertains to work and work ethic, a relationship towards work, a relationship towards sociality and other people. I mean, liberal societies are incredibly restricted because they're capitalist societies are incredibly authoritarian in terms of terms of the form of life they impose. You have to fucking like work until you die, and you're largely alone, and your connections are super thin, like with other people, except in maybe your private life. And I don't know. So yeah, I appreciated that the takedown of the kind of value neutrality and the value openness of the kind of liberal egalitarianism that she's critiquing.
I actually think that I mean I agreed with the argument in a way that was like, as far as this goes, I was pretty ambivalent about it because I think that there's a lot of critiques of liberalism that for some reason, and I think this might have been one of them, I don't know, when I read this stuff, I'm like very sympathetic at the same time that I have like kind of a grimace because it seems to me that they don't actually give the liberals the credit that they are due in some cases, and therefore the critique is not as strong as you would think as it appears. And I think, Will, you said some of this in your introduction, like there's benefits to equality of opportunity over and against previous goings-on of the alternative. But I think that there's two cases that need to be made that this article doesn't make and that people need to make. One, that liberalism is tied to capitalism as an institution. That wasn't clear at all to me in this article. I was kind of like, yeah, the insufficiency of it all. But like, Jerry Cohen tried to make an argument about the difference between socialist equality of opportunity and connecting it to like a socialist ethos in his like Why Not Socialism book. And she cites that, But in a way, the challenge that Cohen is trying to pose is that, like, he's trying to radicalize liberalism to its logical conclusions. And I think most of what's going on in political philosophy is about radicalizing liberalism to its logical conclusions. And the reason that people aren't satisfied with that is because of the institutional context in which that radicalizing is taking place. And I don't see the case being made here that liberalism is attached to an institutional context. It kind of tends to, like, take place in this level of argument where it's like, in principle, this is insufficient. In principle, it's insufficient. And, like, I have to be honest with you, in principle, it's not insufficient. We can have necessary and sufficient conditions all fucking day, and then we can have such a lovely theory of justice, and we can all act like, we can sort ourselves out like that. And there's something about the lack of relationship to a social theory that bothers me about this way of argumenting, even if, like, normatively I am, like, basically with it. Like, that's kind of where I landed a little bit after this.
Right.
If I don't know if that lands or whatever, but.
Well, I definitely see that.
I had a similar vibe.
So my kind of defense of what Sypnowich is doing here is, what I take her to be doing is, she thinks that, if you want to have equality of opportunity, whether liberalism is wedded to capitalism, whether you can radicalize it, what she thinks would have to be radicalized or as shorn away from equality of opportunity is this principle of competition. So I didn't have you all read her response essay to all the responses that she was given, but she ends on this note that I really like, that she says, it's a sad state of affairs that it seems as if so many of the defenses of equality of opportunity, at least that she got, are still couched in this notion of, well, we do need some form of competition to sort out who gets what desserts. And so I think the thing is that, if there is a social theory, the reason why I emphasize competition is, these impersonal dynamics under capitalism that make it seem as if either competition is a natural way of sorting out social outcomes, or it's actually something that we should valorize if we want a sort of meritocratic argument of hierarchy. And so I think what she's trying to say is, what if competition isn't the animating principle of how we judge the goings-ons of our lives, but actually we pay attention to what actually occurs, the outcome. So, I like that idea of challenging that principle of competition that seems to me, at least the people that she cited, and I read some of the responses, some of the people still remain committed to some idea of competition, and, saying, well, why is that the natural principle? The ones who aren't committed to competition, it's actually funny. She says in her response article, I'm talking a bit too long, but I just want to say this. She says in her response article that it's fascinating that the people who say that, equality of opportunity is actually far more radical if you take a Rawlsian position, also agree with the so-called political realists who think, well, given the appetite for change in the American public, equality of opportunity is the best we can do. She doesn't answer this question. She kind of leaves as a pithy remark. But it's like, how is it that the radicals and the political realists tend to agree? And so I think it's about trying to isolate. So what is the animating principle of equality of opportunity? Is it this notion of competition over scarce resources, or can we actually shorn that away and place it in the socialist context? So that's what I took away from it. I like that challenge of competition as the animating principle of social life.
Yeah. So one of the things that she identifies as being kind of messy about the defenses of liberal egalitarian equality of opportunity stuff is that it wants to be able to distinguish between those features of social life that are unequal and unevenly distributed, that are down to just contingent circumstance, right? You just happen to have been born in a certain social positionality or class, etc., and those that are down to choice. And often the idea is, right, we're going to say, like, okay, we'll try to equalize the ones that are not up to you, right? This is the very basic insight of Rawls's sort of original position. You can't have been said to have earned your birthplace and time, right? But those choices that you do make, if those lead to unequal outcomes, well, I mean, what are you going to do? That's just, I guess, you deserve it, or we deserve that. There's something about merit here.
It's unclear to me what's going on there, because is it deserve or is it merit? Yeah,
is it right?
I actually think Rawls is to the left of what people think on this. I think Rawls doesn't think desert has a role to play in justice at all, and I think that's why people saw the opening to push him to the left in the way that they did. I think that's why all these debates exist.
Yeah, well, totally. And I was just going to say, in fact, that like, you know, if we're looking for the animating principle of this sort of liberal egalitarian insight, if Will is just suggesting that it's competition, I might say it's merit or meritocracy. And this is a problem. I think that, in fact, the idea is meritocracy in itself is cool. It's good. Problematically, though, we live in a society that doesn't live up to the meritocratic ideal, right? So that some people have more than they deserve and others do not. And I think we should just jettison the fucking idea of meritocracy wholesale. Nobody deserves any of this. Nobody deserves anything that they get. A socialist ethos is one that's solidaristic and universalist, I think. It has to be like unconditional. I don't think this is about who deserves what at all.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I still feel what you were saying, Lillian, about the lack of a social theory. Because so there were moments in this, which I largely appreciated, moments in this essay where it was reminding me of some of the problems I have with general kind of prison abolitionist like discourse, where I'm like, yeah, like this is all normatively like, you know, this is all normatively great. So why can't we have, what would it actually take to do any of this? Like, and so I think one of the things that's symptomatic is that she never at any point, despite all the gestures towards socialism as having to do with outcomes and not just to do with opportunities, never says anything or even points toward the fact that socialism is also a theory of like an egalitarian theory of power and like who should have power, who should dictate like power at the point of production. I don't mean power in the loose like Foucauldian sense. I mean control over the material like facets of our life. Because then if you have an account of that, then it stops feeling to me as I don't know. Maybe this is a little bit harsh, but as a kind of, I get this feeling in political philosophy a lot of the time that is just, that where you're just doing normative theory in a vacuum. Like, what would it actually take? Just some sense of like how society would have to be so incredibly arranged so incredibly differently for any of these normative ideals to have any teeth whatsoever. And like, you know, something about what that might look like or where that process figures in your thought.
I mean, I'm going to rephrase because I feel like what I meant in the beginning, that people are not giving liberalism its due, it's because in a way, it's not taking seriously the social theory that undergirds liberal neutrality about values and the institutional context that makes that plausible. And I actually think that like the reason I kind of come out like swinging on this podcast in defense of liberalism is not because I'm a liberal, but because I get really tired of like so-called radicals acting like they're these easy knockdown arguments to these arguments. Because if they were easy to knock down, they would not be so fucking hegemonic, you know? And like, so what I actually think is like strong about the liberal case is that it's not value neutrality, it's value pluralism. Okay, and the argument is that we're going to remain agnostic, not about values in general, but about like meta-ethical questions. We're going to be neutral about meta-ethics, about what goods matter, and then we're going to proceed and just take for granted that we can't decide that question, and then we're going to go and do political philosophy. So it's not neutrality, it's pluralism. It's neutrality about meta-ethical questions, not about the kind of life that you think people should live. What makes capitalism the right institutional context for that is that you can bracket the market and make it not the all-determining thing of all the values, unless you're in a utilitarian and you kind of want to have like one measure of value. But like many liberals think that the virtue of capitalism is not that we can measure it in one way. Ironically, because like economists think that we can measure things in one way, but liberal political philosophers think that like actually the great news about liberal democracies that have capitalism as their background condition is that they can bracket the market. You can constrain it through civil society and the law and the state. And because you can bracket the market, constrain it, you can have a plurality of values. And therefore, from the perspective of political philosophy, there is no meta-ethical coercion that's happening. And the whole discourse is meant to create this bubble of value pluralism that is neutral about meta-ethical values. So the system itself doesn't coerce value. Like it doesn't and because it's not coercive in that way, and that's most people's intuitions about how this society actually works. Liberalism gets that's where it gets, like in my opinion, that's where it gets its like deep compulsion. So when we talk about flourishing, it's not just a simple thing to say that this isn't enough. It's that the challenge has to be, I just feel like it's got to be deeper than that, man. Like it's got to be like, no, this social form does coerce values. Yeah?
Right. That's what I was going to say. So I think that's right in terms of a defense of liberalism, but a lot of it sounds to me like the most like ahistorical naivete about how things actually pan out in practice with liberalism. So like, I think there are lots of people that would really like to value like ecology or the environment, but we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice about that. Capital dictates how nature gets valued. We'd like, a lot of us would probably like to limit like the consequences of climate change. That's a major important value for us, but I don't have the freedom to do that. I'm coerced by capital dictates the specific way in which like the natural world gets valued, or any other facet of life, the health of your body or anything. I mean, we are so unbelievably coerced. I don't see, as long as liberalism, and I think it is inherently conceptually tied to the market and to capitalism, I don't see how you get out from under the authoritarian power of capital, unless just through some idealist like mind trick that says no one's forcing you to value a certain thing.
You could choose to, starve. You could opt out.
Yeah, I mean, you could choose to be homeless and have no health care. Does that? Yeah, so that
Sorry,
would be
I'm just imagining someone looking at an unhoused person being like, I respect their choice. They got out of the rat race. I mean, but I also take it. So there are multiple levels to this. I try to be kind to Rawls and all of that, and that's why I made a joke a couple episodes. Yes, he's in the Black radical tradition. So Liam, if you're missing or if you're listening, okay. But I do think that there is something that some people that she does address do seem to make the argument things like the market does actually have this sort of principle of equality insofar as notions of exchange. Notions of exchange are places where each person's preferences and choices have as much value as another person's preferences and choices. So I see part of it is, even if Rawls escapes it.
Such a crazy conception of what the market is.
Look, and apparently there were people who believe this. Like, that's how I think markets work. Absolutely. But, the fact that, that kind of saturates so much of our dominant language of how to even think about equality of opportunity. I take it that, she wants to say something along the lines of this, if the critique goes deeper. A proceduralist approach to these questions are more amenable to falling into, she doesn't use the language of ideology, but ideologies of, well, if the market is fair, and we have this metaphor of the market that I dreamed up, it actually seems as if, that is where we'll find equality of opportunity. Or, this idea of like, well, competition, if there aren't any sort of illicit advantages, well, it will allow us to find out what people are made of, and you can choose to compete in this or choose to compete in that. But she wants to say, but if we focus on outcome, it forces us to be at least intrinsically pragmatic and willing to revise what it is our policies are doing. And so I think, there's a type of ideology critique maybe going on here. Mm-hmm. So you're right. The social theory isn't quite there. And maybe she didn't do justice to Rawls, but some of the responses, and even like, I don't want to name the name, but someone's like, the state is simply a neutral person towards other people's values. It just strikes me as, what's going on?
Bananas.
Let me get a hit of that. I want to live in your head. So that's what I liked. And I can also get into some like things that I was kind of critical of. I took my response to be a quasi critique. I was warm towards what she was doing, but I also think that there is I think an overarching focus on what the state can do rather than why it is equality is something that seems so important to the constitution of our personalities and our social life. But yeah, I want to like separate the chaff of the people who are like, the market tells us what equality of opportunity looks like. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've read some like liberal political theory that has defenses of market mechanisms as the sort of mechanisms that control or govern or dictate the shape of production and distribution and consumption. And it's usually like the more compelling versions are that like there are some features of these, what they describe as like deliberately adversarial institutions in a society that make it so that sometimes the outcomes that it produces are in fact mutually beneficial, even for the so-called losers, or, insofar as third parties can benefit from the fact of competition elsewhere, right? That's fine. And sometimes it seems, in fact, to be true, but often it's not, right? And when it's not, then I think we might have like grounds for, accepting part of the social theory. I can meet you halfway there. But then, yeah, I do think we need an alternative principle that's not this sort of formal, empty proceduralist gesture that just says, well, whatever the outcomes that it produces are going to have to be de facto good, right? Because that's obviously ludicrous. It's completely ridiculous, especially under current conditions. I like the example that Owen gave, right? Like, what do you mean I get to value the natural environment? No, I don't. I actually don't have that option available to me. And the reason why not is because the competitive mechanisms of the market are geared toward capital accumulation and not the valorization of sustainability. It's just not available to me as an option. I don't know.
I mean, you could donate to Greenpeace. Have you ever thought of that?
No, I can't because I'm broke. I can't even do that.
You could buy those. You could buy those those like carbon offset
Those are cool.
scams.
Didn't
or
a
whatever.
report
Like,
recently
those are
come
cool.
out that actually showed that those don't work? So
Yes, of course they don't.
Yeah, it was a scam. Everything in the economy is increasingly
Yeah, we're doing
a scam.
a grift.
Great.
We're doing grifts all the way down, baby. Well, even the idea of the carbon footprint was like made up by the fossil industry, by the way.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's a bummer.
Sorry.
So, I take it one of the central questions here, and this might be a bit too inside baseball, is what Sypnowich is trying to say is how should we approach these questions of what a just society looks like, and it seems to me she is she's at least deeply suspicious of the mere proceduralist route. And one of the critiques of her article, I know you all didn't read it, so I'll just mention it quickly. It was by, I think, Nicholas Rusalis, who wrote a book on exploitation recently. Yeah. Says, well, actually, the socialist society doesn't guarantee, a flourishing life, but what it will guarantee is, truly the opportunity for freedom. And I take it her issue is that maybe the proceduralist route isn't the best way to go. Now, the worry is, and I'll bring this up and see what you all make of it, is at least as far as I could tell from what she wrote here and what she writes in the response article, she doesn't actually tell us what is the content of flourishing. And I think that is where the rubber's going to meet the road with people being really suspicious of this account. Flourishing sounds nice until you have to start doing that hard work of saying, so what does flourishing mean? And once she takes off the table things like, of course we don't mean force. I mentioned that to show that I was being fair to her argument. She's not talking about that sort of idea of like the government sends agents to everyone's house and holds a gun to their head and says, flourish now. But
flourish, bastard.
So what is the content of this flourishing? And if we're focusing on outcomes, how do we bring it about? If this is, to follow what Owen was saying, if this actually has teeth to it more rather than simply just being like, I sure wish we could flourish more, but alas. So, yeah, I didn't see her say much about what,
I guess that this is what I'm saying, though, about the institutional context. Like, I'm really, like, what bothers me about these, like, liberal debates is not the normative principle of the thing. Like, I am for lots of liberal norms. I say it all the time. Like, liberalism with a small L is like, I don't think it would be legitimate to most people. It wouldn't be legitimate to me. There's, like, if illiberalism, I mean, like, there's a way in which there's not really, the controversy is not about those principles all the time. The controversy is about the context in which you see those principles taking shape. And like the reason that analytical political philosophy has a really hard time just like wrapping its head around this point is that what the Hegelians out there are saying and what the Hegelian Marxists have been saying for ages is that these norms change. Their salience, what we expect of them. Like, and I think take that as part of what Will's saying. What you think they are, the content, the ethos, the pathos, everything about them, the salience, the different things that become salient based on how we reflect on these norms changes relative to conditions. Like these concepts, I just think like low-key everybody in political philosophy is an idealist at the end of the day because they think concepts do things. I don't think concepts do anything. I think concepts pretty much are what we make of them. So we think equality of opportunity right now And we think equality of opportunity, given a certain schema and regulation of the market and legitimate state intervention and so on and so forth. Okay, and then we say we want equality of outcomes, and we think bullshit ideas like equity. Okay, but it's also like relative to a terrain of competition. And so the institutional context in which people see these concepts playing out, it's not the concepts themselves. Like the concepts themselves are usually pretty hegemonic. They're usually these are liberal societies for the most part. They're usually seen as pretty legitimate. And everything that's controversial about them has to do with how people see them as being implemented. So when, for example, people say that stupid debate about I'm really being polemical today, I'm sorry, but that stupid debate about equity and equality. The whole problem is that when people hear equity, they hear that austerity, that you're going to take from some and give to others, and we're all going to stay just as fucking poor or whatever. And then the people who say equality are like, no, we want to make everyone's lives better. And then other people imagine, no, but then some people are still going to be on shorter boxes and bullshit like that. The thing is that the problem with these norms is that
I was going to bring up the boxes.
Philosophers are really smart when it comes to thinking about the necessary and sufficient conditions for justice, but they are really bad at understanding and debating the institutional context in which people are seeing these norms play out, which is the only thing that makes them controversial. That's it. That's my soapbox.
You know what's actually funny about you saying that? Two things, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about what I wrote in response because I think it follows from that. One, again, I'm not trying to call anybody out, but recently on Twitter I saw someone make the distinction between political philosophy and political theory, and they said, with political philosophy, don't need any knowledge of what's going on empirically in the world, only have stated premises. And I guess this person...
In fact, the claim was that it harms your political theory to have any knowledge of world institutions, politics, events, anything like history.
And you know what? I'm not going to try to go too hard, but what the fuck are you talking about? And this is kind of what I was trying to say in my response about equality. Equality is it is a historical concept of changing expectations. If you take yourself to be equal, that means that you expect others to treat you in such and such a way. And so equality for me, what I kind of think of why I like the sort of the solidaristic impulse that Sypnowich kind of ends on is that equality must be something that is changing vis-a-vis the institutions that we have, because equality is also about how we understand how we relate to one another, the types of regard that we have for one another. And so if you want to talk about
that was your point, which I thought was a great point.
Thank you. I'm a pretty smart guy. But I think
so. I'm gonna keep you around.
Appreciate. Don't fire me yet. But if we try to make equality this sort of a formal principle, I think we miss the real sort of historical teeth that equality has for people. Not just in their day-to-day lives, of course, but also in changing historical circumstances and institutional contexts. Which means that equality is, for me, a concept to be fought over, and it is a problem if like when people hear equity, they hear deprivation, and that just goes to show you that this is something to be militated over, to change our expectations, to rejuvenate this concept apart from what we have now.
Yeah, just speaking to that and to the idea of the question of what the content of that flourishing is. I thought I liked that last part on the solidarity. That's my favorite part of the essay. There, I do think she tried to at least again make some gestures that like what the content of flourishing would look like in so far as it has to be like collective. She references this claim that capitalism makes people's environments get plainer and grimmer and barer, that we are alienated and lonely. And so I would love to hear like what kinds of institutions like I am, and this is a very low key kind of comment, but I am very much pro like we should have social clubs, all kinds of, these should be things that are like institutionally like integrated into life. Like one of the things that's really cool in France is like you just got in every little neighborhood, these little, especially like in the South, like these pétanque courts everywhere, and they have a little public building attached to them, and everybody meets there and they drink and they play pétanque like all the day and stuff. Like, look, I know that's an incredibly low key thing, but just in my more kind of I don't know, that's abstract utopian moments, yeah. like this is part of human flourishing. We need to be building little institutions and social clubs like this all over the place. But anyways, that it's a bit of a tangential thought, but I do think that at least we're getting a little bit closer to like what the content of flourishing flourishing looks like at that last part. Solidarity, communal life, institutional support for communal life.
I guess one of the sorts of questions that I was wondering about, and I was wondering if you all had thoughts about this, was like, so like, Sypnowich has moved to shift the focus from equality of opportunity to equality of flourishing. I agree. I'm a little unclear on like the content of flourishing. That seems like something that I think I'd like to know a lot more about. But I was given the sorts of critiques that she like anticipated and tried to like ward off in advance, I was pretty surprised that there was like almost no discussion of worries about consequentialism more broadly, right? Like this is like a huge motivating factor for the development of like Rawls's theory of justice, for instance. He's very keen on zeroing in on some real problems that arise when you like have a utilitarian consequentialist sort of angle, right? You have this sort of openness to abuses of minorities, a lack of inability to ground an adequate theory of rights, this sort of thing, sacrifices for the so-called greater good. I don't know, like, did you all have any worries along any of these sorts of lines around consequentialism when it's like, when she's insistent, right? Like, we should care about outcomes. We should be talking about outcomes. Did that sort of arise for you?
Yeah, I mean, like, because I also thought, because she's criticizing Dworkin as well, and Dworkin's, like, whole book is about a critique of, like, welfarism. And any of the debate, and any, in a way, this debate about equality of outcomes can, like, only happen in North America, because, like, if you talk to anyone on the European left, the hostility to welfarism is like basically their modus operandi. It's like the equality, the bureaucracy that comes from this, the lack of attention to what individuals need to flourish, the kind of degrading things that you have to do in order to like ascertain like the equality of outcomes vis-a-vis the state, and that's kind of what I mean is like, I'm like beating a dead horse here, but like, in a way, the normative theorizing is just it's not just enough. It's like, it doesn't even, I used to feel like really like self-conscious that I was the one who wasn't getting the normative theory. And in a way I wasn't. And then I like went back and I like read in the 90s and the early 2000s and like did the, I kind of like did my homework. And now I'm realizing like my problem isn't with like fitting the getting the schema correct, and then again the necessary and the sufficient conditions and the lexicology of like the norms. That's fine. In a way, it's like the reason it doesn't satisfy isn't because I have a great alternative ordering of norms or theory of justice. Frankly, it's that I'm frustrated that this doesn't seem to conceptualize a different way of living than the one I live on. And in fact, it seems to mirror to a great degree the one in which I currently live and don't like.
Yeah, totally.
So
which sucks.
It's like a
I recognize this world all too well.
You know what? It's like a methodological thing, and like you can try to convince me all day that no, I promise you can just like imagine these norms in a different context, and like then you can also have socialism. I agree. My imagination is so capable, but for some reason, it's just not sticking. Yeah, and it's not sticking for anybody else either. So,
yeah, one of the things that makes me think of when I read that kind of incredibly abstract, like historically, socially, and politically unmoored political philosophy, like normative theory, is like what it would look like. It reminds me of doing political philosophy without ever thinking about politics. It's like if you did philosophy of science, but you had no interest in the doing of science, or if you did philosophy of art or aesthetics and you had no interest in art.
Never stepped foot in the museum.
There's a way. Yeah, there is a way in analytic political philosophy, especially, but it's not just there, where you all of a sudden politics just completely disappears from the scene of political philosophy, and instead we're talking about this other ontological like sphere of like political life in general. And that is just, to me, it's just the most bare, impoverished. It's such a joke when I read it. Like, I don't understand. It's a massive publishing industry or something, because it doesn't have any connection to anything. It doesn't illuminate anything. It doesn't like advance any project. It is just, you're just pleasuring yourself.
Woof. Get him, Owen. Okay. I mean, I'm just going to fall on them and be like, yeah, Owen, fire emoji. I think, my issue is like something like equality. I actually think that there's something distinct about equality and how it motivates, political and social transformation. Not just there's an imaginative component to it, there's an emotive component to it, but that, it actually changes the horizons of what I ought to think society should regard me as. And then when equality turns into this, this empty formal concept that isn't rooted in experiences of social conflict and struggle and all of that, all of a sudden there's kind of follow what Lillian was saying. Some of this political philosophy stuff I read, it feels almost disciplinary, as if like, no, we need to check your expectations of what equality looks like. In fact, equality ought to look like something that looks very much like our world. But don't worry, we'll make some tinkers at the edges. We'll swap in this institution rather than that institution. And I'm like, you don't get the heat of equality. That's what I think is really special about as a social principle. But then you just disarticulate it and it becomes a disciplinary mechanism of circumscribing horizons to figuring out, it turns out we were the ones we were waiting for all along. Like, cool.
Can I just make 2 quick points here? One is that, like, if you only ever read these sorts of political philosophy texts, like, you'd be like, I guess Fukuyama was right. This is the end of history.
My boy! We got to do an episode on him.
There's nothing. There's nothing to hope for.
That's my bestie.
Like, he's your bestie. And the second thing I wanted to say is that, like, yeah, it's true that these ideas have historical conditions, right? And they develop. And, like, I just wanted to note that I think that the hollowed out empty form taken by equality when it doesn't have this sort of substantive utopian content is, frankly, capitalist equality, right? It is the reduction of all to abstract units of labor power or labor time. That's it. And you know what? I already got that kind of equality. And it sucks.
You live it every day. And
I'm living it.
It doesn't hit like it was promised.
I liked your what you were doing there, Will, and your response when you were like trying to integrate the concept of equality into practical life, like into how it gets taken up in emancipatory struggles as as you put it, a kind of horizon of expectation. And you reference Frederick Douglass, who said that his expectations for his position in the world and how he was to be treated, etc., were totally altered just by acquiring literacy. Yeah, like that's, to me, like that's what I thought was kind of missing. That element of thinking about equality was what I thought was missing from that Sypnowich piece, in which it's like to integrate egalitarianism into egalitarian practice, like into as a feature, a facet of social life or emancipatory struggle or something, a little bit too in the sky, I guess.
So I was debating whether I was going to bring the heat here, and I've cooled down a bit because I vented to you all about it, but if you want an example of how I think equality as a formal concept gets so degraded in people's minds, look at what happened with Thomas Chatterton Williams after that Jordan Neely thing, where, basically he turned into this guy being like, well, let's look at both sides. In a sense, we now know that Jordan Neely had a criminal record, so I'm not saying he deserved to die, but sometimes in a society, these are just the things that have to happen. I just think there's just something so empty in the regard that he had for a man who was choked out of his life for 15 minutes. And it's just
so fucking ghoulish. It was fucking ghoulish.
And I get it. You want to say that, TCW came right up to the limit saying, looking at the choices that Jordan Neely made in his life, it's a tragedy, but in a strange way. And, I just think, I'm not saying everyone thinks like TCW, but from the amount of people who are engaging, more people think like that than we might expect, that you're not going to get, a social society with people who attend to equality in the essence of there are those who will be damned and there are those who will be saved. And I just thought that this was such, a guy who always talks about, beats us over the head with, universalism and not judging people by the color of their skin. But when it comes to a poor black man who's locked out of the labor market, all of a sudden that regard doesn't extend to him. And that tells me that, he is not actually actually as well practiced inequality as one needs to be to build a different society. And so that tells me procedural principles don't always get you there. And obviously, someone like Rawls, you would have a way of saying that Jordan Neely's situation obviously requires state remedy. But what I'm focusing on is like how we deal with equality in our social lives. And for some people, equality means that there are those who deserve well regard in social health and those who we prefer not to see. And I think one of what the gripping principles of equality is, it should allow us to challenge that and say, like Gil was saying, that's ghoulish. That isn't the types of people we should want to be, but that doesn't happen naturally.
Yeah, the way that language of like choice and like desserts got trotted out like afterwards is so fucking disgusting. Like
he became a villain in his own story, and it's incredible, but because he's the one who's dead, and and I just think that is a really sad ecology of social reason and reason given. I've been thinking a lot about that. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that does it for us
Jesus
today.
Christ.
Oh, well, yeah, that wasn't I didn't expect that to be a downer note. I thought like that was going to be awesome,
All right.
but
everyone get out there and develop a social theory, please. Capitalism's the fucking problem. I'm tired.
I mean, but can I I do want, I'm not sure, I do want to add one more thing that, I do feel like your essay, I think people should read that. I do feel really like the set of expectations that people have around equality is pretty important. Like that debate about equity and equality, frankly, is a big bugbear for me, because I think what it sounds to me, the reason I raised it before, is what it sounds like to me is actually we have such a degraded idea of equality that we need other concepts to fill in the blanks. We've decided equality is actually something that's something besides equality.
Nice.
We've decided equality is actually inequality. And that is a mirror of what the market is like. Yeah? The market is equality that produces inequality. And I think this is what's ideologically complicated about capitalism, is that it's not false or unreal that the market produces a state of equality, like what Gil was saying.
Yeah. Right.
It's also the case that it produces inequality.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to keep doing this until I reach enough people that, I don't know if you know this, but I'm sure you three know this. I hope our listeners know this. The left used to have much higher expectations.
Yeah.
When there's social rights, social equality. Okay, there was even in the old left, even in the United States, under conditions of segregation, you had debates about social equality. And they knew that was something different from other kinds of equality. And you had arguments back and forth. So we have, and the story about Jordan Neely, it's think about what the kind of equality that you're talking about. You're talking about a very degraded kind of opportunity set structure and all of this. And what I see happening is that the expectations of equality are actually so low that we've decided equality is wrong and we need some other kind of concept. As opposed to raising our expertise, because I have news for everybody out there. Equality is not inequality. Equality is equality. The market turns it into something else, and the left's job is to challenge the way in which it does so with a more expansive, more robust, more uplifting and aspirational idea of social equality. When you start saying, no, not equality, equality isn't good enough, we need a bunch of other concepts to fill in the blank, what you are conceding is the market logic that turns equality into its opposite. And that's why when people hear you talk about things like equity, people are like, oh, this happens in the market and this isn't just, and I don't deserve this and other people don't deserve this. And then you get to play the merit game about who needs higher boxes and who doesn't. Why? Because you've already conceded it. You've given up the game. The whole thing is gone.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I really think this is important. I really feel like we're in a bad place at this time with the way that people understand moral universalism, what it's for, and what it's about. And all of these arguments, oh no, not universalism, particularism, no, we need blah, 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 blah. It's the same bullshit. It's people who are already falling so far down the hill of having like aspirational social politics that they have decided that, well, that hill isn't worth climbing over. So we're going to, and then they're like, oh, we're not doing that. We're not giving up inequality. It's also equity. It's also all these other things, whatever concept you want. You know what? No, because the institutional context is what it is. And when you make those arguments to people, I am sorry to inform you that that is the institutional context in which they see it, which is market competition. And then they see it for what it is. You're not arguing for equality. You're arguing for something else. It's just giving up.
Yeah. I think that's right and well said.
Totally.
And one of the things, like to Ranciere's credit, like a lot of what his work he did earlier in his work, where it's based on kind of archival research about 19th century proletarian social, like political and social movements, and like the concept of equality that they were working with and developing there, like in the history of like 19th century working class struggles, is incredibly rich. It has to do with there not being an inherent set of capacities or entitlements that mean that some people should govern and other people should be governed. It has to do with control over facets of your social life. It is we very much. Why do we always end up doing this? We just introduce a new concept like equity, which gestures that some of what, I don't know why I keep saying gestures that. It's one of these expressions I actually make me cringe, but I keep saying it today.
That's fine.
This concept of equity, which like pulls a little bit from this more socially rich and dense conception of equality, but actually ends up just serving more like other and different, more covert market like functions. Maybe we were all right with equality and focus on like filling in like what that should mean for us. Exactly.
I think I agree with everything that you all are saying. It does us a disservice to abandon the battlefield of that concept, because I think that concept, it is this battlefield of expectations, and to simply let it go is actually, strikingly to just renaturalize our way of life now. And I can understand why that wouldn't be motivational towards people to building a different society.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine you apply for a job? Oh, you know what? We don't really do equality here.
We do equity. Okay. Yeah. By the way, equality, that's the bad thing. Like, I don't actually understand my world anymore. Okay. But thank you for that. We found a way to not end on the down there, but end on raising the flag of equality. Thank God. Because I was just gonna go.
Good concept.
Yeah, great concept. You know what?
For it.
Goated.
Yeah.
Officially.
On the record, pro equality. Actually,
it's just really sad. Like, this is where we're at. I feel really sad that, like, we have these uprisings. I said this last time. Like, we have these. I think I'm like in this mood right now, because to me, the period from like 2015 to 2021 is just, it's over, and we're in this period where we've re-engaged this kind of like eschatological dystopian thinking, and in a way, we've actually like given up all of the good things we think we could have. Let me put it this way. There's this period in which people thought like middle term goals were feasible, reforms, we could lift boats or whatever. And now we're not there. And so like the kind of the things that were going on before that 2015 period, like the equity stuff, that stupid meme, and they have like seized upon our consciousnesses with a vengeance, because it's almost like the disappointment, it has become too great. And I feel like the past like 50 years are now like weighing on us like a nightmare, so that even all the things that the left once thought were good have now turned into nasty bad things. Universalism, equality, I can go on. Think about any principle that like people thought was good and desirable. Now we're not for that, because we see how limited they all are. And it's like, I'm sorry to tell you this, but concepts are not limited. Concepts are what you make them to be. And if you think they're limited, it's because you have a limited concept, not me. And like what we need to do is have social movements that make concepts feel like, I think this was really good about your article, more animated, more live for people. And the more you start telling people it's not enough, we need to mishmash all these other things, it's hard to see how they all fit together. We also need this, and we also need this. And you need to make things simple so that people can see themselves in a more shared vision. And it can't be so piecemeal and partial and small and in this. It has to be much bigger. And I feel like as soon as you turn inward and backward, it's a way of giving up. And this is what's been going on for a long time. It's just now I'm feeling it more acutely because I can see the wave of optimism and disappointment. And, we've got to get our way out of it, people. I don't know what else to do.
Completely agree. Well, that does it for us today. New episodes of What's Left of Philosophy come out every 2 weeks wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube for videos and live streams. Before closing out today, we'd like to take a minute to thank some of the people who are supporting the show on Patreon. We couldn't do this without you, and we're really grateful. Today's new patrons are Family Office Remora, Scott Fines, Jasper Nathaniel, Juan Carlos Mora, Kai River Blevins, Jacob Castle, DED, Art Y, Annalena Di Giovanni, Cameron Paro, Lino Wimmer, Josh C, Bram, should have censored that 12, Michael Gottsegan, Ming, God bless our boys, Matthew St. Charles, Robin. Thank you all very much. If you too like what we're doing and want to support the show, please go to our website, leftofphilosophy.com, and click the support button. Patrons get access to exclusive content like locked episodes, bonus videos, and access to our Discord server. You can also buy some What's Left of Philosophy merch from the store linked on our website. Follow us on Twitter at LeftOfPhil, and don't forget to leave us good reviews and comments on your podcast app. With that, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Peace.
Bye.